Hello everyone, welcome to episode 275 of the Pulp Ritter Show. My name is Jonathan Muller. Today is October 31st, 2025, and today we're talking about the Praetorian Guard of ancient Rome and how that can inspire fantasy novels. Also, happy Halloween, or happy Protestant Reformation Day, if you prefer. Before we get into all that, we will have Coupon of the Week and a progress update on my current writing, publishing, and audiobook projects. First up, Coupon of the Week. This week's coupon code will get you 25% off the ebooks in my Silent Order series at my PayHip store. And that is Silent 2025, SILENT 2025. And as always, both the coupon code and the links to my store will be in the show notes. This coupon code will be valid through November the 10th, 2025. So if you need a new ebook for this fall as we come into winter, we have got you covered. And now for an update on my current writing and publishing projects. As I mentioned last week, Cloak of Worlds is now out, and you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Google Play, Apple Books, Smashwords, and at my PayHip store. The initial response has been very strong and very positive, so thank you for that, and I'm glad that people are enjoying and reading the book. Now that Cloak of Worlds is done, my next main project is Blade of Shadows, which will be the second book in my Blades of Ruin epic fantasy series. I'm currently 44,000 words into it, which puts me on chapter 9 of 20, though I'll probably have more chapters in the final draft than I will in the first draft, because I found people really do tend to prefer shorter, punchier sort of chapters. Anyway, I'm about 44,000 words into it. I think I'll be about 9,000 words when all is said and done, so hopefully that will be out in November. I'm also 4,500 words into the next Riva book, which is Wizard Assassin. It had originally been entitled Elven Assassin, but I decided Wizard Assassin sounded punchier, so we went with that instead. I'm about 4,500 words into that, and if all goes well, it will come out in December, which will make it the final book I will publish in 2025, though hopefully I'll be publishing more books in 2026 before too much longer. In audiobook news, Brad Wills is currently recording Blade of Flames, and we've been listening to some proof chapters of it, and I'm very excited about what we're hearing. Hollis McCarthy is starting work on recording Cloak of Embers. That'll be the 10th book in Cloak Mage, and hopefully we will have both of those audiobooks out before the end of the year, if all goes well. So that is where I'm at with my current writing and publishing projects. Now let's move on to our main topic this week, which is the Praetorian Guard of the ancient Roman Empire. And they were very bad at their jobs, but we'll get into that more very shortly. One of the fascinating, if occasionally depressing, aspects of history is how often institutions end up having the exact opposite outcome of what they were intended to do. The late science fiction writer Jerry Pournelle had something called Pournelle's Iron Law of Bureaucracy, which that once a bureaucracy got large enough, it will inevitably start turning its main focus to perpetuating the bureaucracy rather than carrying out its actual mission. And we can see examples of that time and time again. And no doubt you yourself can think of many examples. Schools that make their students dumber, military organizations that fail to defend, hospitals that make people sicker, bureaucracies that exacerbate the problems they were created to solve, and so forth. This can also apply to social movements as well. My favorite example of this is Prohibition in America. The temperance movement of the late 19th and early 20th century achieved its goal of banning alcohol sales in the United States during the Prohibition period, but the backlash and the consequences made it unpopular. And today, while alcohol is much more heavily restricted than it was at the end of the 19th century, the idea of banning alcohol in the United States is utterly implausible. The Praetorian Guard of ancient Rome, the personal bodyguards of the emperor, might be another example of such an institution that utterly failed at its primary goal. For over 1,000 years, people have been asking why the Roman Empire fell, and I think that might actually be the wrong question. The better question is, why did the Roman Empire last as long as it did? Because it sure almost didn't. At the height of its power, the empire controlled land on 3 different continents in an area larger than many modern states, and it had to maintain that control without anything resembling modern technology and organization. Think of the difficulties involved in governing a large multi-ethnic state in the 21st century with modern technology and communications, and imagine how much harder it was in the 1st century AD. Travel was difficult and dangerous, even with the Roman road system. The account of St. Paul's shipwreck in the book of Acts must have been an all too common experience in the Roman Empire, given the number of Roman wrecks on the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. Messages could take weeks to reach their recipients, and there was no division between civilian and military authority. That meant if the emperors wanted to do anything, they had to use the army to do it, because the army was the only pool of skilled men loyal to the state. Since the empire never really solved the problem of succession and the transfer of power, it didn't take long before ambitious men figured out that the man with the largest army could declare himself emperor, and the Roman Empire actually broke apart into 3 competing mini-empires and almost fell apart entirely in the middle of the 200 ADs. So, as we can see, there were a lot of reasons the Roman Empire fell apart, and the Praetorian Guard, the bodyguard of the emperors, was one of them. The Praetorian Guard certainly wasn't the sole reason the Roman Empire collapsed, but the Guard most definitely didn't help. In the last century of the Roman Republic, one of the growing problems was that the armies were less loyal to Rome and more loyal to their general, who made sure they got paid and received grants of land upon discharge. To show their prestige and to guard against the danger of assassination from rivals, generals began collecting personal bodyguards. Since a Roman general commanded from a tent in a legionary camp called a praetorium, the general's private guards became called praetorians. Obviously, the general wanted his best troops as his bodyguards, so becoming a praetorian was a privileged position with higher pay and perks. This practice continued as the Roman Republic split apart into civil wars between the ambitious generals of the first and second triumvirates. The civil wars of the Roman Republic ended with Octavian, later known as Caesar Augustus, as the last man standing with sole control of what we now think of as the Roman Empire. Augustus is remembered as the first Roman emperor, but the office of emperor didn't really exist at the time, not the way we think of it now. Rather, Augustus was essentially a military dictator, but after he went to great lengths to conceal his power under a cloak of legality by having the Senate invest him with various official powers and offices. In modern terms, it would be like if the United States was ruled by a military dictator who simultaneously held the offices of President, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Speaker of the House, Senate Majority Leader, the governorships of the 5 most populous states, all while claiming to be only the first citizen among equals. Essentially, Augustus invented the powers of the Roman emperor on the fly while being a military dictator, and his successors followed suit. Julius Caesar famously pardoned his enemies and went around without a bodyguard to show his courage, which ended up getting him assassinated. Augustus, by contrast, was determined not to repeat that mistake, so after annihilating his enemies, he founded a personal bodyguard in what we know today as the Praetorian Guard. That's a modern term. The Praetorians never called themselves the Praetorian Guard, and they always referred to themselves as the Praetorians of whichever emperor they happened to be serving, like the Praetorians of Augustus or the Praetorians of Claudius, and so forth. Augustus seems to have seen some of the potential danger in the institution of the Praetorian Guard, and during his reign they were scattered around Italy, with the ones guarding him rotated out every so often. The Praetorians in Italy, when not guarding the emperor, tended to do odd jobs for the government that needed doing, like policing, construction, surveying, settling boundary disputes, and so forth. However, Augustus's successor Tiberius concentrated the guard in Rome, which made it even more dangerous. It also tied into another problem with the Roman Empire, one that it never quite managed to solve, which was the succession problem. Augustus was a military dictator who assembled a sort of ad hoc legality around his position with various offices and powers. But how would he pass that on to a successor? What if someone else decided they were the proper successor? Augustus had taken his office by force, so why shouldn't anyone else? The Praetorian Guard exacerbated this problem further. Was their loyalty to the office of the emperor, which was tricky because that office didn't technically exist? Was it to the man himself or to his heirs? Perhaps unsurprisingly, the Praetorian Guard eventually settled on the most practical answer to this question: their loyalty belonged to whoever paid them the most money. There's a very high chance that Tiberius was murdered by the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, which means that the imperial bodyguard made it only two emperors before it started killing them. Tiberius' successor Caligula was famously insane, and the guard eventually got sick of him and participated in his murder. After Caligula's death, the guard declared Claudius as the new emperor, who repaid them by giving them lavish donatives. That meant the guard had gone from protecting the emperors to killing ones it didn't like and then installing new ones. After the Senate turned against Nero and he committed suicide in 69 AD, the Roman emperor had its year of 4 emperors: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian, who won the civil war and became the new emperor. Each of the potential claimants had their own praetorians who fought against other praetorians. The original Praetorian Guard of Nero did not cover itself in glory, as their comfortable life in Rome did not make them effective as field soldiers, and they lost against the toughened legionaries from the frontier armies who came to fight in the Civil War. That said, during the reigns of the 5 good emperors, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius from 96 to 180 AD, we don't hear much about the Praetorian Guard. The most likely explanation is that these emperors were strong and capable rulers, so the Guard had no reason to turn against them, and therefore any potential conspiracies that would have involved the Guard just didn't get off the ground. However, part of the reasons that the 100 ADs were the apex of the Roman Empire is that Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and Antoninus Pius did not have sons, so they adopted a capable leader as their son and heir, thereby creating continuity of rule. Marcus Aurelius, unfortunately, had a natural son named Commodus, and after he died, Commodus became emperor. Commodus was a spectacularly incompetent narcissist, nowadays famously known as the villain from the movie Gladiator. If anything, Gladiator toned down Commodus' brutality, though to be fair to Commodus, he didn't murder his father like the fictional version did in the movie. Commodus was eventually assassinated, and the Praetorian Guard hit its lowest point soon after. Pertinax became the emperor after Commodus, and there was hope that he'd be a Nerva-type figure, a respected elderly senator who would adopt a capable heir the way Nerva did with Trajan. However, Commodus had used the Guard as his privileged force of personal thugs, and Pertinax tried to impose discipline upon them. The Guard most definitely did not care for that, and so they murdered Pertinax and then auctioned off the title of emperor to whoever would pay them the most. Soon after, Septimius Severus seized control of the empire, and he summarily fired all the Praetorians and put his own veteran legionaries in their place. So, the Praetorian Guard, which had been intended to guard the emperors, ended up murdering the emperor on a regular basis, and sometimes choosing a successor, and even auctioning off the title of emperor to the highest bidder. Septimius Severus was a brutal ruler and held the empire together long enough to die of natural causes. His sons Caracalla and Geta were his successors, and Caracalla murdered Geta before he was assassinated himself by yet another plot from disgruntled Praetorians. After that, both the empire and the Guard declined precipitously. This was the period later historians would call the crisis of the 3rd century, when the Roman Empire fractured into the 3 competing mini-empires I mentioned earlier. A depressing pattern rapidly took hold. The Praetorian Guard, or the army, would kill an emperor and proclaim a new one. The emperor would last until he tried to do something the army didn't like, such as imposing discipline, and then the pattern would repeat. The Praetorian Guard was never really reformed, but like so many failed institutions, it gradually became obsolete. Part of the reason was that the empire was subject to frequent barbarian invasions throughout the 200s. The emperor was required constantly on the frontiers to supervise the defense with the field armies. The emperors developed a different kind of bodyguard called the Scholae Palatinae, a mounted group of soldiers that would accompany him in the field as he moved about the empire. The constant defensive warfare also resulted in a subtle shift within the empire. Rome was no longer the center of power within the empire. The center of power was actually wherever the emperor happened to be at the moment. The city of Rome itself had become in many ways an expensive vestigial relic of another age. Some of the emperors only visited once, some of the shorter-lived ones never made it there at all, and the emperor certainly did not rule from Rome. Because of these changes, the idea of the Praetorian Guard, a permanent bodyguard force based in Rome, had become obsolete. The actual end of the Praetorian Guard came after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, the battle where the Emperor Constantine famously had the vision that led him to convert to Christianity. The Praetorian Guard sided with Constantine's opponent Maxentius, and since Constantine had no use for the Praetorian Guard, and indeed would move his new capital to the new city of Constantinople, he simply had the Guard disbanded and continued to rely on mounted cavalry units for his personal bodyguard. So the Praetorian Guard, after three centuries of frequent treachery and corruption, had come to an end. Amusingly, while the Guard was gone, the title of Praetorian Prefect remained in use to the empire for the rest of its history, which came to show just how powerful the commander of the Guard could become. In the end, the Praetorian Guard was yet another example of an institution that became a hindrance to the very goals it was founded to advance. This seems to be a curse of any organization, and the only cure is constant vigilance and strong leadership, two qualities, alas, that are all too rare at any age of history. Yet you can definitely see why I say history is the best source of material for fantasy writers. You could get like 20 different novels out of the events I discussed above. So that is it for this week. Thanks for listening to The Pulp Writer Show. I hope you found the show useful. A reminder that you can listen to all the back episodes at https://thepulpwritershow.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review on your podcasting platform of choice. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you all next week.